first shot rang out like a crack of thunder across the frost-bitten pines of Hollow Creek. A small girl, barely 6 years old, stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, her breath forming pale clouds in the air. Her name was Eliza Moore. Bundled in an oversized jacket, she had wandered from the trail, drawn by a sound that only she seemed to hear. The second shot sent a flock of crows spiraling into the dull gray sky. Beyond the ridge, three men in hunting gear moved quickly through the snow, rifles at the ready. "Step back, kid," one of them shouted, his voice sharp with panic. "That thing's dangerous." But Eliza didn't move. In fact, she did the opposite. She walked forward. Ahead, behind a chain-link fence half buried in snow, a massive black creature paced. It looked like a wolf, but larger, its golden eyes gleaming with an eerie awareness. The men yelled again, their rifles rising. Eliza ignored them. With a calmness that defied everything around her, she stepped up to the fence, her small hand raised, not in fear, but in recognition. The beast stopped, its ears twitched, then it sat. "You don't have to be afraid," Eliza said softly, her voice carrying like wind through trees. "He's mine." The rifles lowered, the air stilled. The moment, brief, surreal, hung like mist. Down the hill, her mother, Dr. Serena Moore, watched in stunned silence. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. Eliza stood there, separated from the creature by nothing but wire and instinct. And somehow it listened. Later, people would struggle to explain what they saw. Scientists would cite behavioral anomalies. Locals would call it supernatural. But in that fleeting moment, it was simple. A silent girl and a misunderstood beast found each other. That was the day Eliza met the one she would call Nightfall. And everything changed. Eliza had never been like other children. From the moment she was born, Serena sensed something different, something unspoken. She didn't cry in the delivery room. She didn't coo or babble. Her eyes always seemed to look past people rather than at them. By the time she was 3, doctors confirmed what Serena had feared. Eliza was on the severe end of the autism spectrum. Words were rare, gestures even rarer. She resisted touch, avoided eye contact, and remained locked in a world no one could reach. But there was something else. On Eliza's left wrist, faint but undeniable, was a birthmark shaped unmistakably like a wolf's paw. Doctors called it a congenital nevus. Harmless, they said. Coincidence. Serena didn't think so. A single mother and a veterinarian in the quiet town of Wren Hollow, Serena tried everything to help her daughter connect with the world. Animal therapy, sound therapy, color therapy. Every program left them disappointed. Eliza remained distant, unreachable, until the day they met Callum Reed. He ran a sanctuary far off the grid, beyond the ridge roads, hidden behind thickets and snow. A wiry man with silver in his beard and a voice like gravel, Callum listened quietly as Serena explained Eliza's condition. Then he nodded once and led them down a winding path of enclosures. "I've got one left," he muttered, "but he's different." At the end of the line was a black-furred pup sitting alone. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail, just stared through the fence with sharp, amber eyes. Eliza walked to him, without a word, without prompting. She knelt and pressed her palm to the wire. The pup stood, padded forward, and pressed his nose to her hand. For the first time in her life, Eliza smiled. Callum stared at the mark on her wrist, then back at the pup. "Well," he whispered, almost to himself, "the wild's chosen." They named him Nightfall. And from that moment on, neither Eliza nor the creature were ever the same. By the end of the first month, Nightfall had doubled in size. His frame thickened, muscles coiling beneath a coat of midnight black. At 4 months, he weighed more than most adult shepherds. By 6, his shoulders reached Eliza's chest. But it wasn't just his size. His movements were precise, calculated. He didn't chase after toys or bark at squirrels like normal dogs. He watched. He listened. And always, always, he was near Eliza. Serena couldn't ignore it. As a vet, she had treated countless dogs and wolves over the years. None of them moved like Nightfall. None of them felt like Nightfall. He obeyed Eliza without commands. A tilt of her head, a shift in her fingers, and he would lie down, follow, or sit. She never trained him. He just knew. But the town began to notice. Whispers started after a jogger caught sight of Nightfall leaping a 6-foot fence without effort. A neighbor swore she saw glowing eyes in her backyard at dusk. The stories grew, always shadowed by fear. They let that beast live with a little girl? That's no dog. That's something else. It all came to a head one icy morning when Nightfall chased off a pair of coyotes near the school bus stop. He didn't attack, just stood, tall and silent, between them and Eliza until they fled. Someone called the sheriff. Soon, town officials demanded Serena keep Nightfall secured or removed. But before Serena could speak, Eliza stepped forward at the community meeting. Quiet, shaking, but determined. "He's not dangerous," she said. "He's mine." The room fell silent. She raised her wrist. The mark was visible beneath her sleeve. "He listens because we're the same." Nightfall, waiting patiently outside, sat unmoving, eyes fixed on her through the window. No one argued after that. Not because they understood, but because they believed her. Concerned by Nightfall's rapid growth and uncanny behavior, Serena decided it was time to seek scientific answers. She reached out to Dr. Emilia Hart, a wildlife geneticist known for her unconventional research. At the university lab, Emilia observed Nightfall quietly, occasionally jotting notes as the creature moved with eerie grace around the sterile exam room. "He's showing neurological responses beyond domestic capacity," she murmured. "Not just intelligence, something ancestral." Blood and hair samples were taken. DNA swabs. The data was sent off for full genomic sequencing. The results arrived a week later. Serena sat across from Amelia, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Serena," the doctor said gently, "Nightfall's DNA is unprecedented." She handed over the report. 86% Northwestern wolf, 8% domestic, likely husky. The remaining 6% is unclassified, possibly an unknown canid hybrid. It's unlike anything we've ever sequenced. Serena stared at the paper. "Is it dangerous?" Amelia hesitated. "Not in behavior. But legally, in this state, any animal with over 50% wolf content is classified as a high-content hybrid. Regulations are strict. Containment, identification, permits. Without those, it's technically illegal to house him outside a licensed sanctuary." The words hit like stone. There was only one option: relocation. A place called Ridge Hollow Sanctuary, deep in the northern forest, agreed to take Nightfall. The facility specialized in high-content hybrids, offering both freedom and protection. But none of that mattered to Eliza. The day of the separation, she clung to Nightfall's thick fur, her fingers buried in his ruff. "You said we'd stay together," she whispered. Nightfall didn't growl, didn't pull away. He just rested his head in her lap, eyes dim with understanding. When the gates closed behind him, something inside Eliza dimmed too. And for the first time in years, she went silent. Days after Nightfall's departure, Serena received an unexpected visitor. Callum Reed stood on her porch, his weathered coat dusted with pine needles, hat in hand, eyes heavy with something unspoken. "I heard about Ridge Hollow," he said quietly. "And the girl." Serena nodded, her voice tight. "She hasn't spoken since he left." Callum hesitated, then finally said, "There's something I never told you. About Nightfall. About her." Inside, over lukewarm coffee, he unfolded the truth. "Years ago, I was part of something called Project Fenrir. Funded off the books, hidden from the public. The goal was preservation, not of wolves as they are, but as they once were. We wanted to blend wild canid DNA with domestic lines, preserve the instincts, the intelligence, the purity. Nightfall," he continued, "was born from that line. A bridge wolf, meant to carry the ancient blood forward." Serena stared in disbelief. "And Eliza?" Callum's gaze darkened. "When I saw the mark on her wrist, I knew. She's one of them. We used to call them threadborn, children born with the ancestral sign. Not just random birthmarks, but remnants of something old. A bond written into blood." That same week, Serena sought out Elias Stone, an elder of the Koa people who lived beyond the southern ridge. He welcomed her into his cabin without question. "The paw on your daughter's wrist," he said after hearing everything, "is known in our language as Shanka'ala, the wolf's embrace. It appears once every few generations." "Those marked by it," Elias continued, "do not choose the wild. The wild chooses them. They carry memory, not just of their own lineage, but of the creatures they're bound to. The bond is not taught, it is remembered." Serena felt the weight of it then. Not myth, not legend, but something older than both. Not coincidence. Destiny. Weeks passed in silence until Serena made a desperate call to Ridge Hollow. Her voice cracked with emotion. Her request simple: "Please, let her see him." To her surprise, they agreed. Under strict supervision, Eliza was granted limited access to Nightfall's enclosure. No contact, no entry, just observation. He was lying beneath a cedar tree when they arrived, unmoving. But the moment Eliza stepped closer and whispered his name, Nightfall, his ears twitched. Then he stood. He walked to the fence with deliberate steps, stopping just inches away. Eliza pressed her hand to the mesh. Nightfall lowered his head, eyes meeting hers. For minutes, neither moved. From that day on, Serena drove Eliza to the sanctuary every afternoon. She brought a sketch pad, drawing Nightfall in motion, when he paced, when he watched, when he rested. But she did more than draw. She began to gesture. Small, deliberate movements with her hands. At first, no one paid attention. But one handler, curious, filmed a session. Wave. Nightfall sat. Knee tap. He froze. Finger curl. He rolled. They ran it again and again. The results were the same. He's not responding like a trained dog, said Dr. Cale Jensen, Ridge Hollow's behavioral specialist. He's reading her. Almost. Syncing with her. Curious, Cale requested genetic data. Using old pediatric records and Nightfall's earlier sequencing, a strange pattern emerged. A mirrored segment in both Eliza's and Nightfall's DNA, a unique genetic signature. They called it the bridge gene. More than a mutation, it behaved like a resonance, one that enabled cognitive and emotional attunement across species. Whatever this is, Cale whispered, it's rewriting what we thought possible. Eliza didn't need to know the science. She already knew the truth. They understood each other. The air grew colder at Ridge Hollow, the trees losing their leaves in slow, mournful spirals. Nightfall no longer met Eliza at the fence. He slept more, ate less. His coat, once radiant, dulled like old smoke. The staff grew concerned. Blood tests were ordered. Scans followed. Dr. Amelia Hart stared at the ultrasound, her expression unreadable. Finally, she pointed to a mass near Nightfall's spleen. It's aggressive, she said. Most likely hemangiosarcoma. Serena felt the world tilt. That night, she didn't tell Eliza the full truth, but Eliza knew anyway. He's tired, she whispered, barely audible. I can feel it. The next day, Eliza collapsed during art class, her skin pale, her breath shallow. At the hospital, urgent tests were run. 3 days later, Serena sat in a cold consultation room, a pediatric oncologist across from her. Eliza has acute myeloid leukemia, he said gently. It's rare and it's aggressive. Serena's hands trembled. No, that's not possible. She's just a child. But the facts were immovable. 2 beings, 1 child, 1 wolfdog, diagnosed within days of each other. The odds were astronomical. Back at Ridge Hollow, the team gathered. Serena, Amelia, Cale, and Elias Stone. This isn't coincidence, Amelia said. It can't be. Cale opened a digital model of their genome data. There's something deeper happening, a genetic echo, the bridge gene. It's not just bonding them emotionally, it's linking them biologically. Serena looked at the screen, then at Elias. What does this mean? The elder's voice was soft. The bond that connects them is ancient, but like all sacred things, it comes with weight. Pain shared is pain multiplied. Outside, Eliza slept fitfully in the car. In her dreams, she whispered one word, blood. And Nightfall across the sanctuary stirred for the first time in days, his ears twitching as if he'd heard her. Cale paced the lab, hands shaking with a mix of fear and revelation. It's insane, he muttered, but it might work. Across the table, Serena stared. What are you suggesting? He took a breath. A stem cell transplant, between them, from Nightfall to Eliza, and maybe even the reverse. The bridge gene may allow cross-species compatibility. Their immune systems recognize each other. That's never been done, Amelia said, stunned. Cale nodded. Because it was never possible. Until now. Silence fell over the room, heavy and unreal. It wasn't science fiction anymore. It was the only hope either of them had. Elias Stone stepped forward. His voice was quiet but resolute. Before you begin, he said, there's something older than medicine you must do. They gathered that night deep in the sanctuary woods, beneath ancient pine trees, where stones marked the earth in a circle forgotten by time. A fire burned low in the center, smoke curling into the dark like whispers. Eliza, pale and wrapped in a woven blanket, sat beside Nightfall, who lay with his head in her lap. Elias knelt opposite them. From a pouch, he drew sacred herbs in a carved wooden bowl. This is not a spell, he said. It is memory, carried in blood, passed through breath. He dipped his fingers in smoke, then pressed one to Eliza's wrist and one to Nightfall's chest. One spirit, one thread, he whispered. Walk this path together. Heal, if the old ones will it. Eliza didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her hand curled into Nightfall's fur. His breath deepened, slow and steady. At the edge of the clearing, Serena watched with eyes full of tears. Science had given them a chance, but something older had given them permission. The surgeries took 12 hours, 2 operating teams, one child, one creature. A shared thread of hope stretched across species and science. Serena didn't move from the observation window. She watched Eliza's chest rise and fall in shallow rhythm. Across the partition, Nightfall lay sedated, machines blinking steadily beside him. Then, in the quiet of early dawn, a miracle began to stir. Eliza's white blood cell count, once dangerously low, began to rise. Her fever broke. She stirred in her sleep, lips parting with a whisper. "He's coming back." Moments later, across the room, Nightfall exhaled, deep and slow. His paws twitched, his ears flicked. When they wheeled his recovery crate beside Eliza's room, his eyes opened. He looked toward her and whined. Weeks passed. Eliza regained her appetite first, then her words, then her laughter. She started drawing again, this time not in silence, but humming as she sketched. Nightfall began to eat. His coat grew darker, glossier. He stood with renewed strength, his eyes alert, posture proud. The sanctuary, once quiet in awe, buzzed with renewed energy. The impossible had become reality. With Elias's blessing and Kale's supervision, Ridge Hollow launched the Bridge program, a pioneering initiative pairing rescued hybrids with neurodivergent children and trauma survivors. Eliza became its first ambassador. At 7, she led group visits, introducing children to animals with a gentleness only someone like her could offer. Nightfall never left her side. He walked with purpose, sat beside her during lessons, and even lay beside anxious children until their breathing slowed. Together, they had crossed the edge of what was known and returned with a new kind of light. The bond that had once isolated Eliza had now become the thread that connected others. Not a miracle, a beginning. Độ dài chính xác 2.000 ký tự, bao gồm khoảng trắng. Spring came softly to Ridge Hollow. Buds bloomed, streams thawed, and deep within the sanctuary, a new life stirred. Nightfall had fathered a litter, unexpected, quiet, and rare. Most of the pups were strong, loud, mischievous, but one was different. She was the smallest, jet black like her father, but with silver tips at her ears, and eyes, those same molten amber eyes. They named her Ember. While her siblings tumbled and nipped and chased shadows, Ember watched, always watching, especially Eliza. Weeks passed before she approached. Eliza was sitting cross-legged in the field, sketchbook in her lap. Without warning, Ember padded over, silent as dusk, and placed a single paw on Eliza's leg, exactly as Nightfall had done years ago. Eliza didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand reached out, resting gently over the paw. A breath, a pause, then a smile. "She knows," Eliza whispered. "She remembers." Ember followed Eliza everywhere after that, beside Nightfall, who now walked with a regal calm, the streaks of silver in his muzzle only adding to his quiet majesty. Together, they were more than a girl and her wolves. They were a story still being written. By summer's end, Eliza led small groups of children along the forest path, teaching them how to move slowly, how to listen to the wind, how to speak with their hands. Nightfall walked at her right, Ember at her left. At the edge of the tree line, she stopped, turned to the group. "Some of us," she said softly, "are born with something different, not broken, just tuned to another kind of song." She looked to Nightfall, then to Ember. "I used to think I was alone." She knelt, one hand resting on each creature. But I wasn't. I was just waiting to remember. And in that clearing where pine met sky, 3 silhouettes stood, child, guardian, and heir, bound by blood, by instinct, and by a thread unseen. Not goodbye, just forever.